Hi, everybody. This is Kayla Gaypart, the Associate Director of National History Day in Colorado. And today I'm going to be going through judge training. There's a couple of new items this year. The rules have been updated and the evaluation forms and note takers have been updated. So I'll go through the basic judge orientation, then I'll go through notable rules changes, and then we'll go through the new note takers and rules sheets. At the end of this video, we will also have a training for virtual contests, as a number of our contests this spring of 2021 will be virtual because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's kind of what we're looking at, and I will go ahead and get started. So if we were to contest, normally everyone would have a packet. If you do a virtual contest, this information will be emailed to you, but essentially you'll have a number of items in your packet. Your judging assignment, you'll either be in the junior or senior division. So the junior division is grades 6 through 8, so that's middle school, and senior division is grades 9 through 12, so the high school students. Students can compete in individuals or as groups of up to 5 students, except in the paper category. The paper category can only be done individually. And for interviews, not all members of the group need to be present. There only has to be one representative of the group. And there's 5 categories students can complete a project in. So website, exhibit, performance, documentary, and paper. And as I said, that's individual only. So typically inside your judge packet, you would have a name tag, your general schedule of the day, your judging group interview schedule, which would have each project you're going to be looking at and the times you'll be interviewing the students, a step-by-step outline of your responsibilities as a judge, suggested interview questions, guidance on feedback for the students, a theme sheet, and this year's theme is communication and history, and category-specific note takers. So if you're judging in person, you will get all of this information the day of the contest. And if you're judging virtually, it will all be emailed to you. So the schedule by category. Performances, they get 20-minute time slots per entry. So that's 5 minutes to set up, 10 minutes for the actual performance, and 5 minutes for interview and teardown. The same is true of the documentary. So that's a 20-minute entry slot as well. Papers get 10 to 15 minutes for an interview depending on the contest. Usually it's only 10. Websites, 10 minutes for the interview. If you're judging websites or papers, those will be sent to you as judges ahead of the contest date. So you will already have looked those over and you're just conducting the interview on the day of the contest. So if you're judging in person or virtually, the student shouldn't be walking you through their website the day of the contest. You're just doing the interview. Exhibits, so judges will have 1 hour to view their exhibits as a team. And if we're in person, no one but the judges is allowed in the exhibit hall. And there's 10 minutes for the interview after that initial hour is over. So your schedule, whether you're virtual or in person, stick to that posted schedule. If in person, friends, parents, and teachers can watch documentaries, performances, and websites, there's no audience in papers or exhibits. You're in charge of the time, so you'll either go to the door to call students into the judging room or you'll let them in through a virtual waiting room on Zoom if you're virtual, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Students will be in a designated waiting area for exhibits. So your goal is to rank the entries from strongest to weakest. So if you have 10 entries, you're going to rank them from 1 to 10, 1 being the best and 10 being the weakest. We don't assign a numerical score. This is just ranking the projects against one another in your group. So this is an example of the judging sheet that you're going to see, and we'll break this down a little bit more later in terms of what has changed, but I'm just going to walk through each of the categories that you would be judging on and kind of what you're looking for in that area. So a historical argument, this indicates that students have a thesis statement and they're not just telling you a narrative of a historical event. They're making an argument and they're using evidence to prove that argument. And in this category, it's also important that they include the annual theme. So usually we encourage students to use the theme words in their thesis statement. This year that would be communication and history. The second category, wide research. what you're looking for here is that the students use a body of credible information, but that they use a range of different sources, right? So they are using newspapers and books and articles and photos and a variety of sources, and that they're credible. So things that we steer students away from citing are Wikipedia, encyclopedias, as those are tertiary sources. They shouldn't be cited. Quotes.com, students should be finding the original quote in a credible body of research, not a quote repository. Historychannel.com, we discourage, just because often the individuals that they're using as experts in some of their stories aren't actually subject matter experts. So that's kind of what we mean by a body of credible information. Primary sources. So the point of this historical project is that students are using primary sources to bedrock their argument. Their argument should really rest on the primary sources that they find. They also need to have secondary sources, but those primary sources should really connect directly back to their argument. You can see here, if they were to get a fair rating, they might have primary sources, but they don't really do anything for their argument. So that would be if students just, threw a bunch of photos on an exhibit board that didn't really pertain or prove their argument. That would be a fair rating there. Historical context. So what we're looking for here is that students address what's happening before, during, and after the event that they're identifying, and that they're addressing short-term and long-term causes of the historical event. So this is really where they're addressing the so what factor of their project. They're telling you why you should care about this, why this project should matter to you. But they shouldn't be addressing their topic totally divorced from history. They do need to contextualize what's happening there, place you on a historical timeline. Multiple perspectives. So this is really, really important. This is a lot of times what takes a good project to great. So a student that uses multiple perspectives is going to argue a certain way, but also address that, there are other perspectives on this event and what happened and how it happened and why it happened. And that gives them credibility. So they really need to address more than one perspective, address both sides of the argument, or if there's multiple sides of the argument, they need to be acknowledging those in their project. Historical accuracy, if nothing else, students should score pretty highly here. Generally, they've done a decent job researching their own specific topic. There's generally not a lot of historical inaccuracies, but do watch for them. So, if there's mention of like Hitler during World War I or Nazi Germany during World War I, like that would be a red flag for sure. But generally, students do pretty good here. So significance in history. This is where students are analyzing those short and long-term impacts and drawing a conclusion about the topic's significance in history. So this is where they're really wrapping everything up, tying their impacts back to their thesis statement and giving you kind of a 1-2 punch statement about why this matters and what the significance of this event that they've chosen to study is. Student voice. So we do encourage students to use interviews and, quotations and things like that from their primary source body of research, but we want them to interpret those things through their own voice. They can certainly use direct quotations, but at its core, this should be the student's project and them telling you a story, not them hobbling together a story that somebody else has already written. So that's really, really important that we acknowledge student voice. So those categories that I just went over, those are the historical quality categories. Those are worth 80% of the student score. So you'll notice we haven't addressed anything about quality of presentation. We haven't addressed anything about technical aspects of the project, because at its core, a History Day project is about historical quality. So we're really judging the bulk of the project on that. I always tell judges that I can take an exhibit board that has amazing history and make it pretty, but it's really, really hard for me to take a pretty board and teach a kid history in the 2 or 3 weeks or a month that they might have to prepare for state or nationals. So just keep that in mind. So the clarity of the presentation here, 20% of the students score. So audio and visuals, students are going to want to use audio and visuals that are clear, not pixelated photos and things like that, and that are appropriate for their category. So in a website, we're really going to want to see multimedia in that website, because the students have chosen a category that has the tools to do that. So videos, slideshows, things like that. On the exhibit board, we should see a range of different types of sources and visuals on there, from quotes to photos to newspaper headlines. So it just depends on the category, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. The technical, this is where we're looking at especially grammar and punctuation, and that everything is clear. So that includes like an audio, the audio in the documentary and the narrations, that you can hear all of those types of things, and that there's no grammatical or punctuation or mechanical errors here. So that's what you're looking at in technical. And then each category has rules infractions, and those are the things you see listed under the clarity of presentation category. These do not disqualify a student. There are only a few disqualifiable offenses, and that includes intentional plagiarism, reusing a project from past years, whether that was the student's or whether it was another student's, and tampering with another student's project. So those are the only disqualifiable offenses. Usually we use rules infractions to break ties. So if there's two really great projects and you can't decide who's third place, you're going to look at which student satisfied all of the rules, and that's who's going to move on. These are things that need to be corrected before, say, state and nationals, but they're not disqualifiable offenses. So for the documentary here, the things listed, entry is less than or equal to 10 minutes. Can't be more than 10 minutes. So entry is student produced. Entry includes source credits at the end. So at the end of every documentary, the students have to list a brief citation for all of their visual information. A process paper is submitted. An annotated bibliography is submitted. And the process paper word count is listed on the title page. So those are all the things you're looking for in documentary, and we'll go over those in more detail here in a minute. And then you are going to list your comments at the bottom of this sheet. So strengthen areas for improvement and general comments here on the back side. So in terms of those rules compliance issues, those vary based on category. So we'll go over each of those now. So for the documentary category, the time has to be less than or equal to 10 minutes. So students can't exceed 10 minutes. A couple of seconds, is still okay. But if it starts to give the students a significant advantage, we really have to pay attention to that. The entry is student produced. So this has to be something the student has created, and you can ask those questions in your interview, but generally you'll be able to tell if the students created this project based on the written material they also provide. So entry includes source credits at the end. So at the end of every documentary, students have to provide brief citations for the visual material that they used in their documentary. And usually this flies by pretty quick at the end of the documentary because they're trying to stay under time, but they do have to have this acknowledgement section. A process paper is submitted. We'll talk about the process paper a little bit more in a minute, as well as the annotated bibliography is submitted. And the process paper word count needs to be listed on the title page. So for the exhibit, there is a height, a size limit for the exhibit. So we will check those prior to contests. If this is a virtual contest you're judging, that won't be an issue, but there is a height limit and a general width requirement that students have to adhere to. So the exhibit can contain no more than 500 student composed words. So the things that do not count in student composed words are direct quotations, and captions, as long as the caption is only sourcing material for photos and, newspaper articles and things like that. So that shouldn't include anything other than the name of the image or painting or whatever, the author or creator, and the year. So, and where the student got it. So Library of Congress or something like that. That is all that should be included in a caption. Students can't have extended captions to get around that word limit. So just an idea of what 500 student composed words is, that would be one single spaced side of a single sheet of paper. So keep that in mind. Visuals and quotes are credited on the exhibit. So that's what I was talking about, that caption that students need to include for those items. So, a quote from George Washington, they would say, George Washington first inaugural speech, the year, and then where they found it. So Library of Congress. Media devices. So some students will choose to include media in their projects, and normally this is in the form of some type of video that they play on an iPad or something in front of their exhibit. This cannot be more than 2 minutes long. Process paper and annotated bibliography are submitted, and the process paper word count again has to be listed on the title page of their written work. So rules compliance for the paper. The paper has to be a minimum of 1,500 words and no more than 2,500 words. And in this case, direct quotations do count towards the student's word limit here, but footnotes and endnotes do not, as long as they don't have an extended footnote or endnote, kind of the same as the situation with the caption on the exhibit. The entry includes citations, so they do need to be citing in Chicago or MLA style throughout the text where they're using direct quotations or information that's not originally theirs. And then again, their process paper and annotated bibliography is submitted, and they need the word count of both their paper and their process paper on their title page. And you might notice here, this year it's new, students have to do a process paper in the paper category. So now all categories require a process paper. For performance, the time limit for the performance is again 10 minutes. Media devices are optional, but they have to be student operated. So an example of this might be students have slides or something of that nature, or music that they're using during their performance. They can't have help from a parent or a teacher. It has to be run by the students performing. The process paper and annotated bibliography is submitted, and the process paper word count is listed on the title page. And then finally, website. Again, the website can have no more than 1,200 student composed words. The same as with an exhibit, direct quotations and captions do not count. The multimedia time limit across the entire website is 3 minutes. Visuals and quotes, again, need to be captioned and credited on the website. And the website can have no links to external content. So the bibliography is the exception. If the students found a source at another link, that can be listed in the bibliography, but no links anywhere else in the website. The process paper and annotated bibliography have to be incorporated into the website as a PDF. Otherwise, they're really hard to read and really hard to access. So make sure that those are PDF files within the website. The student shouldn't be giving you hard copy process papers and annotated bibliographies. And then on the home page, the students need to list a range of information. So they need to include their name, the division and category they're competing in, so senior individual website, junior group website, the total running time of their media, the word count of their website, and the word count of their process paper. So that needs to be included on the homepage of the website. So again, here are those 4 disqualifiable offenses. I forgot to mention failure to publish a website. So if the students don't publish the site, you obviously can't view it. But again, those are plagiarism, reusing a project, and tampering with another student's project. So these are some notable rules changes, and I'll go through this in more detail, but I'll run through these pretty quickly here. So previously, students could have toy and replica weapons if it was appropriate to their project. Those are now prohibited. No weapons at all of any kind. The process paper is now required in the paper category. Paperwork in all categories must include a title page. So that includes name, category and division, student-generated word count where applicable, process paper word count, and multimedia time where applicable. So basically what you should receive from students is a set of written work with a title page, then their process paper, then their annotated bibliography, except in the website category where all that information is within the website. All primary and secondary sources must be cited and annotated, not just those cited directly in the project. So if a student looks at, say, a book to inform their research but doesn't directly cite it, that now needs to be included in the bibliography. I think a lot of students were doing that anyways, but just be aware of that. Annotations can be no more than 2 to 3 sentences max. For papers, captions and words in the footnotes and endnotes, other than the citation, count towards the word limit. So that's what I was talking about with an expanded footnote or endnote. They only can have that citation information. Performances, interactions with the audience is prohibited. Exhibit multimedia can now not exceed 2 minutes. Previously, it was 3 minutes across the entire project. And students cannot use links to external content or QR codes with their exhibit. That's something that's been popping up a lot in the last few years, where students have little cards with QR codes that allow them to kind of skirt the word limit and provide you more information. Websites, hyperlinks are prohibited, and multimedia now cannot exceed 3 minutes. Previously, it was 4. And the bibliography and process papers have to be embedded as PDFs in the website. So a few notes on topics. Students can choose any historical topic as long as they connect it to the theme. So, don't think that students shouldn't be doing something on Barbie or whatever. As long as they can connect it to the theme and make a reasonable argument, they can do whatever they want. The age of the topic, the rule of thumb is about 15 to 25 years old. So students can choose more recent topics as long as they draw long-term impacts. They cannot choose current events. But something to remember is the vast majority of students that will compete in these contests didn't live through 9/11. Actually, all of them at this point. So that's a historical event to them, the same as the Vietnam War. It might not be to some of us who are older, but that is a reasonable topic that they can do. And don't dismiss a topic because it seems small or insignificant. So students can do things like family histories as long as they connect them to wider cultural and social trends. So the top 2 or 3 entries in your judging group will advance to final rounds or to state. This will depend on how many entries and heats there are in the contest. And so this will be specified on your judging materials. The interview. So this is the student's chance to shine. They should do most of the talking, but you should be the guide. So you're the one asking the questions. They are not giving you a prepared presentation. That's not what they're doing. So timing, again, 5 minutes for performances and documentaries, 10 minutes for exhibit and websites, and 10 to 15 minutes for paper, depending on the contest and number of entries. You'll receive a handout with possible questions. And something really important to remember is just to be consistent in the handling of interviews, especially if you have an audience. Kind of structure your interviews the same way for all your kids. Make sure not to tell one kid great job and not another kid, because they're interpreting everything you say as whether they won or lost. So be really, really careful there. How much does the interview count in the final evaluation of the project? None. So you are using the interview to, discern if the kid did their own work, if groups split the work across themselves. And things of that nature. But there's no formal scoring for the interview on the evaluation sheet. And in the final rounds, there are no interviews. So the project has to stand on its own. So please be aware of that when you're filling out the evaluation forms and choosing who to move on. An excellent interview and a bad project is not a good option to move on to the final rounds or to state. No cute points. The kids are so cute. Don't give them extra points because they're cute. Okay, so your paperwork. When you return to the judge room after the preliminary rounds, you'll pick up your preliminary round evaluation packet. If the contest is virtual, I will have sent this to you already, so you'll have this at your disposal right from the get-go. So the preliminary round evaluation packet will have an advancement form in it. You need to do this immediately and either give it to me or email it to me in a virtual contest. This will be your top 2 or 3 entries. The form will say how many, and you'll either move students on to final rounds if necessary or to the state contest. The official evaluation forms need to go back to the students. So you need to fill those out in a way that the students, they have constructive feedback, and it's a mix of constructive criticism and things that they did well. Lastly, you'll fill out a ranking form. So you'll rank all your entries from strongest to weakest. And that's in the event that if you move students onto state and the 3rd place individual can't compete, we'll contact the 4th place individual as an alternate. So all groups need to fill out one set of forms, official evaluation forms, advancement forms, and ranking forms cooperatively. So you're all working together on this. And I would really recommend you need to do that advancement form first. And I need that before anything else so I can prep final rounds if necessary. Then I would fill out your official evaluation forms and then the ranking form after you've kind of gone back and reviewed all of the projects. So filling out the paperwork, if we're in person, we'll have overflow rooms and lunch available for you. Final rounds, judges arrive by about, or return from an overflow room by about 12:30, so we can start organizing that if in person. Your comments are absolutely key. So for praise, please include at least 3 items of substantive praise that students can take away from this experience. Most students will not be moving on to another contest, so this is really important. And please also include constructive criticism, at least 3 things that students can take away from their project and say, okay, next year I need to do this better. Or to prep my project for the state contest, I need to do this better. So please be specific and please be thorough. It's really, really important that the kids feel like this has been a valuable experience, even if they don't move on. And I know the paperwork is tedious, but this is the kids' takeaway. This is what they've been building up to. So please be really thorough with those comments. Final rounds. So if we're in person, if you're currently signed up, you'll get an orange slip in your packet. If we're virtual, then we'll arrange this all beforehand over email and things like that. Do remember there are no interviews in the final rounds. So if you're going to judge the final rounds, you'll get a new set of paperwork to fill out and to work with, and you'll just be looking at kids' projects. You will not be doing interviews. Okay, so now we're just going to go over some of the significant rules changes in a little more detail so that you all have that. So the evaluation form, before you would have had a section 60% was historical quality, 20% was relation to theme, and 20% was clarity of presentation. Now the forms are set up so that relation to theme is built into the historical quality. So 80% of the format is historical quality and 20% is clarity of presentation. The evaluation forms are now in a rubric format. So you can read the different categories and decide where your student falls on that rubric format. And that'll give both you and the students kind of more guidance as to where they rank and to how they can improve in the future. So English and translations. New language has been added about submitting entries in languages other than English. So all entries for competition must be submitted in English unless otherwise approved by your contest coordinator. So the students can use other languages, but they have to provide translations in English. When considering translated text for the purposes of word count, judges will only count the English translation. Now, the exception to this would be if students are using a direct quotation and they have a direct quotation that is translated, that would not count their words. Prohibited materials. So again, replica and toy weapons are entirely banned. They cannot be at the competition venue. The title page. So we're really pushing the title page this year for the paperwork, and the homepage of website serves as the title page for that category. And it has to include name, division and category, word count of student-generated words, so that's for the paper, website, and exhibit, the word count of the process paper, and total time of multimedia for the exhibit and website. The process paper. So process paper is now required in all categories. Previously, the paper category was exempt. And the process paper cannot include quotes, images, or captions. So just 500 words, that's the limit for process papers, detailing the student's process. So an important thing to remember about the process paper is that students shouldn't be packing in a bunch of additional analysis. They have to, put all that analysis on their board. It can't be in their process paper. They're just detailing their process in 500 words. These are the questions now that need to be addressed in the process paper. So students have to address these 5 things. All of them were previously in the rule book, but they've added what is your historical argument. So the student's just supposed to state their historical argument. And in addition to that, they need to address how they chose their topic and how it relates to the annual theme, how they conducted their research, how they created their project, and in what ways it's significant in history. The annotated bibliography. So previously, only sources used and cited in the project itself were included in the bibliography. Now all primary and secondary sources consulted in the development of the entry are included in the bibliography. Annotations. Annotations now have a maximum length. Previously, they didn't. And they're supposed to address 3 questions. And all annotations for every single source in the paper have to do this. So the students need to address how they use the source, how the source helped them understand the topic, and clarify why they classified a source as primary or secondary if it's not clear. So now annotations can only be a maximum of 2 to 3 sentences long. So the exhibit category, previously students could have multimedia up to 3 minutes across the entire project. Now that has been reduced to 2 minutes, and that media cannot loop. So you as the judges have to push play on the media and then it has to stop. It cannot be looped. And again, no links to external content such as QR codes or anything of that nature. The website category, students have to build their websites on the new platform that was introduced last year called NHD Web Central. They cannot build on anything else. And previously, multimedia could not exceed 4 minutes. That is now 3 minutes. This includes audio and video clips, including music. So again, this cannot loop. Hyperlinks are prohibited. Written materials must be embedded. And they have to be embedded in PDF formats. And no hyperlinks are allowed on the website except in the bibliography. So there's also a number of notable rules clarifications in the new rulebook. Not necessarily changes, but things that weren't clear. So interviewing historians is discouraged unless they are primary sources, while oral history interviews are strongly encouraged. So we're still encouraging students to conduct interviews because it's good experience, and we are just discouraging them from using big chunks of the interviews unless they're primary sources in their project. But you may still see interviews because we are still encouraging them as a learning experience for students. Students must use their own words to analyze the research and draw conclusions. This element is now included in the official evaluation form. That's the student voice element. So we do want to make sure that students are interpreting all of their sources and their argument through their own voice. Rules infractions are not grounds for qualifications, but may absolutely impact ranking of a project by the judges. So that's always been the case, but they're just clarifying it in the rules specifically. Changing categories or topics is not permitted after entering the first level of NHD competition. So once a student is competing in the individual exhibit category, they cannot change that. They cannot change their topic, and they can't change like the core of their thesis statement, but they can make edits and additions and subtractions to the rest of their project. So the 5 minutes following the documentary and performance now include both the removal of props and the interview. So do promptly start your interview, but don't be surprised if students start taking down their exhibit and their documentary equipment, because they only have 5 minutes to do both of those things. So MLA and Chicago are both acceptable citation styles, but Chicago is highly encouraged. So we're really pushing Chicago with students, but they shouldn't be deducted for MLA because it is still allowed. But we should suggest Chicago wherever possible. And students must include multiple perspectives in the project. Again, that's always been the case, but it's been clarified in the rules now. Word count. So this is just an example of how the judges at the national office count words. And so this is in the rule book where you can access in the judge folder, and I'll have some copies available in judge rooms for in-person contests. But this is how words are counted if you have any questions about that. Reasonable help. So we want students to be the primary constructors and researchers and historians on their projects, but a teacher can definitely help edit papers, proofread papers. A parent can help if a student's building a set and they need to use power tools or something like that. So that, again, this is just clarification on what reasonable help is. Plagiarism. So again, clarifying plagiarism. Plagiarism includes but is not limited to turning in someone else's project as your own, failing to put correct quotation marks around direct quotes and include both a source credit and a proper citation of the source, failing to provide proper citations for all quoted and paraphrased material. So even if it's not a direct quote, if it's not the student's idea, it needs to be cited. Failing to provide the sources for audio, video, or images used in your project, and giving incorrect information about the source of a quote. Those are all plagiarism. So sources that function as both primary and secondary sources. So this may be the case if a student is looking at prohibition, and they're using a 2019 newspaper article reflecting on prohibition in Colorado, then that would be a secondary source. However, if the student's using it to describe the long-term impacts of prohibition in their project, then it becomes a primary source. So now students cannot list a source in both places, but they have to choose where it fits best and justify that in their annotation. So just keep that in mind, that sources can't be listed in both the primary and secondary sections anymore. Other important rules, reminders. So only individuals can compete in the paper category. Annotated bibliographies must be separated into sections for primary and secondary sources. Students are responsible for providing all props and equipment. This includes items like tables and extension cords. Some competitions will provide these elements, but they have to check with the coordinator ahead of time. So they shouldn't show up to the judge room and say they need an extension cord. That's not your responsibility. Costumes are prohibited in all categories except performances. So students can't show up to their exhibit in period costume. The interview is guided by the judges, and students should not be preparing a presentation. And the written materials need to be stapled in a single packet with the title page on the front and the process paper and annotated bibliography included. They shouldn't be enclosed in a binder or folder, and they should be, on standard paper, 12-point font, the standard parameters for written material. Projects need to be as close to the maximum word as time limit as possible. So as judges, this is going to be important. If you have a great documentary, but it's only 5 minutes long, that documentary is just not going to be competitive at the next level of the contest. So really consider those types of things when you're deciding which projects you're going to advance. If visuals are included in a paper category, they have to be in an appendix, not within the text. All visual materials in papers, exhibits, and websites must include a source caption. Talked about that a little bit. Credits for the visuals used in a documentary must be credited at the end of the project. Introductions before documentaries and performances can only include the title of the project and names. So students shouldn't be giving you like a 3-minute blurb about who they are and where they came from. Interaction with the audience is now prohibited in the performance category. The inclusion of scripts in your written material in the performance category is generally prohibited, but if we have virtual contests, we will allow this. So please keep that in mind. And website pages must be interconnected with navigational links, a navigation bar in the site. So now I'm just going to briefly show you what these new evaluation forms look like. I'm not going to go through all of the rubric type selections you can make here, but I will go through each individual form briefly so you can see what that looks like. So previously on the evaluation form, you would have just had blank boxes to check for each category. So fair, good, excellent, superior. Now you have specific, indicators about where you should check the box depending on how well the student does it, or if they don't do it at all, you can check not evident. So this rubric format should be really helpful for students and judges in giving them more cohesive feedback. So do make sure you make a selection in every single box. So if there's 2 items under historical argument, you need to make a rating for each of them. And they can be annual theme connection could be fair, while a well-formulated historical argument could be superior. So you can rank those differently within the same category. And again, significance in history is another area where you have 2 boxes to check. So then here we want you to write strengths and areas for improvement. You need to include 3 strengths and 3 areas for improvement that are substantive, at least for students, especially if students are moving on. They need to be able to know what they can improve. But if they're not, they need to be able to know what they can improve and what they've done well for next year. We want this to be a positive experience for students so they'll keep coming back to do History Day. On the second page, clarity of presentation. The rules items that we went over in the judge training are below. And again, those are not disqualifiable offenses, but can be used to break ties. And then more room for comments and more general comments if you have additional things to include. So again, the exhibit looks the same. You'll find different items. They'll largely all be the same up here, except for the rules items. Those are going to differ in each category. Paper, again, some of these boxes do have 2 items that you need to rank. And again, those rules items are different. Performance, mostly the same information, largely the same format. The rules items are going to be different. And the same is true of the website category. So those are preliminary rounds forms. For final rounds, if final rounds are necessary at any contest, this is what the form looks like. So it has the items that you're supposed to consider on the left side over here in this column, but you don't have to check the rubric items. So you can refer to what you're judging on here, but then you are just writing comments. So you really do need to make sure that your comments are extensive in the final round. And then note takers. So note takers we provide to you so you can use them during interviews and prior to the contest if you're judging papers and websites. So you can just make notes to yourselves. No one ever sees the note takers besides regional coordinators or state coordinators and you. These are used to break ties in the event that we can't find a ranking form or something like that. Or if a teacher or student were to contact us and say, hey, I'd like a little bit more information on why I didn't move on, we can refer to these note takers and then transmit that information to the student or teacher. So this is what those note takers look like. Again, these look really similar to the final rounds evaluation forms. You'll input the project title, the entry number, your name, and then you'll just write comments here. And that's all that note taker form looks like. So that concludes our portion of the regular judge training and the rundown of the new note takers and rules. The next section of this video will be about judging virtually for those contests that are taking place online. So please stay tuned. Okay, so now we're going to go over what will actually take place in the lead up to and on the day of a virtual contest. So let's start with registration. To register to judge a virtual contest, you'll use the registration links that you can find on National History Day in Colorado.org, just as you would any other contest. And it will indicate on the website which contests are virtual. We'll also provide all of the normal resources so you can take the online judge training ahead of time. You'll have access to this video throughout the lead up to the contests, and we will still do a morning of judge training. And I will be constantly communicating with this type of information so you know exactly what to expect. So this year, even though these contests are virtual, we want to run them exactly as we would an in-person contest. So we will be hosting interviews, and we're going to do that through Zoom. So the morning of the contest, you don't need to worry about anything on Zoom. I will go in and start all of your meetings and assign the lead judge, which we will determine based on their feedback in the registration form. I will assign the lead judge hosting permissions for that meeting. And what that means is that they will be able to run the interviews. And we'll go over that a little bit later in this section of the video. But prior to the contest, what you're going to receive is an email from me. And this is what that email is going to look like. So you will see in the subject line, if you're judging the state contest, whatever, the subject will have the contest you're judging, the judging folder, and what division and heat you're judging. So if there's a necessity for final rounds, we'll have to break the groups up into heats, and you'll have to choose who moves on to final rounds. If there's not a necessity for final rounds, you'll just choose the winners that move on to regionals or state, depending on what contest you're judging. You'll also see that I will send this email to your entire judging group. So you'll see the different emails up here for your judging group. So you can contact them in the lead up to the contest, familiarize yourself with them, and anything you feel that you need to do. So then down here in the attachments, you'll find digital judging instructions. So you can open these and refer to them throughout the day, just to refresh you on what the flow of the day is going to be like during that virtual contest. So this form is the really important one. This is your entries and rankings form. So this is basically your schedule of the day and which projects you're going to be judging. Now, again, if you have papers or websites, you'll receive those ahead of time, just like normal. So I'm going to pull up this file here. Your Zoom link is also in that file. So inside this spreadsheet, you'll see the times, the entry numbers, the names of your competitors, the project title, and this is the link to their project. So even though I'll send this ahead of time, you'll be able to access the link directly in this sheet. You'll also notice above the Zoom link for your interview is right here in this field. So when you're ready to begin your interviews at 9 a.m. on the morning of the contest, after I've assigned you hosting permissions, you will enter this Zoom meeting. Now, at the end of the day, after you've conducted all your interviews and done your judging duties and whatnot, discussed who's going to win and who's going to move on to either final rounds or the next contest, you will assess the ranks, and please rank all of the projects, not just your top 2 or 3. You will list the ranks here, and this form will be emailed back to me. So this form will be emailed back to me, and the deadlines by which I need the forms will be indicated in that email I was showing you. So you can also stay in this Zoom meeting throughout the day to communicate with your judging group. So I'm going to minimize that. We'll come back to that in a minute. The other thing you'll find in this email are Word document evaluation forms, and they're titled by entry number. So every entry you're going to judge will have an evaluation form. And as a judging group, you'll need to fill out one of these as a group. So not every judge is filling out this form. You have to come together with your comments and agree on what feedback you're going to provide to this student. So it would be best to have the head judge, the lead judge, whoever I assign in that role, and you'll know this prior to the contest day. You will want to have that lead judge fill those out and email those back to me. So here's what those are going to look like. So earlier in the video, you would have seen what the new judging form looks like with the new rules and with the new rubric format. So I have translated those into Word documents so they're easy to work with. So as a judging group, this is the paper preliminary rounds evaluation form. So you'll go through and you can just check these boxes regarding where you're going to rank your student on their particular project. Then we'll go down here. You'll continue with the written material, and the technical, and then the rules compliance per normal. And then strengths and weaknesses. So you click this box and then you can begin typing. And for strengths and weaknesses, please provide at least 3 strengths and at least 3 weaknesses that are substantive feedback. Because as I mentioned before, for a lot of students, this is the end of the journey for them. They're not going to move on to another contest. They're not going to move on to final rounds, but they need something substantive they can take and say, okay, I did really good on these things, but next year I really need to work on these things if I want to move on to the next contest. So you will fill out one of those for each of the entries that you look at. And then again, when you're done with that, you will email those back to me. And then if you would like to take notes on your own, typically in an in-person contest, I would provide you note takers. You'll also see a note taker attachment, and these are also new. So they mimic the judge form and you can just take notes here. You will need to print these out on your own and take notes on those if you would like. After the contest, I do not need these back. You just need to throw them away, and please make sure the notes that are not on the official evaluation forms are not shared with the students. So in the body of email, you'll find explicit directions on what you need to do. Make sure you stick to the schedule in the entries and rankings form, that you're staying on time and trying to conduct the virtual contest as close to an in-person contest as you possibly can, using the Zoom function. This email will also indicate how many projects from each heat will move on to finals, if you need final rounds for this category, and the deadlines by which I need the various forms. Again, this is a sample for if you were judging the state contest. And then down below my signature, you'll find some additional resources that I will link so you can access them throughout the day. Okay, so if you're also judging final rounds or only judging final rounds, you will receive the same type as email as this one, and it will have a new entries ranking form, new official evaluation forms, but the official evaluation forms will look like this. So this is the final rounds evaluation form. There's no check boxes. All that you need to do here is ensure that students adhere to rules compliance and just comment on that and indicate your final ranking in this box. So it looks a little different, but you're looking at the same types of things here with this form. So let's pull up the entries ranking form again and go through how to get onto Zoom. So when you're ready to enter the Zoom meeting, you'll just click this link here. It will launch your meeting. If it gives you that prompt box, do make sure you push allow. And then this is what it will look like. So I'm going to go through and show you all of the Zoom functions. So prior to 9 a.m., before your student interviews start, I will come into every judge room, myself or an intern, and I will assign the lead judge as the host. So once you're the host, you can let students into their interview, you can control functions in the meeting, and you'll no longer need me as a member of your meeting. So I will do that prior to the contest interviews beginning on the day of the contest. I will jump into every meeting and I will assign the lead judge as the host. You don't need to make a Zoom account. You just need to download the Zoom app from the website, and we'll get to that a little bit later, onto your computer. So you'll just download that app onto your computer, and it's very easy and you shouldn't have any issues. So just to go through these functions, you will see your other fellow judges here in this screen. Up here, when other judges are joined, you can change how you view them. So you can view them as a speaker view, where the speaker is the biggest person on the screen, or as gallery view, where you see everyone in equal size. So you can choose that function, and everybody can choose that independently on their computer. If you change your function, that doesn't change it for the rest of the participants in the meeting. So you want to make sure when you're speaking, you're unmuted, and you would just click this button here to mute and unmute. And then to start your video, you click this button. I do encourage you to start your video. Many of the students may not actually have a video function. It depends on what their technological resources provide to them. So if the students don't come in with video, we'll encourage them to do so if they have those resources in the email we send them. But if they don't join with video, don't worry about that too much. They just truly may not have those capabilities. Security, you don't need to worry about that. Participants, you can click on this, and you can, as the host of the meeting, so the lead judge, can choose to mute or turn off the video of someone if there's an issue that is happening. So that's where you would do this. When there's multiple participants, you would push more, and you can turn off the video, you can turn off the sound. So the host will be in control of that. Chat. So here you can chat with the other judges. Please do not chat with the students. You'll want to make sure that there will be a drop down here when there's other participants in the meeting. You'll want to make sure you're not chatting with the student here. So just be sure that you change this to box from everyone just to the individual you want to send a message to. Polling, you will not need this. Record, we do not need the record function. Closed caption, if the closed caption function is needed for a hearing impaired student, I will know that ahead of time and I will let you know. But for the most part, we won't need this function. We won't need breakout rooms, and we don't necessarily need the reaction button, but you can use these emojis to do a reaction. So you shouldn't need to share a screen with the student at all. Unless you want to ask them about a specific aspect of your project. In that case, only the host can share the screen, and they would push share screen, and they would have whatever the student's project pulled up. They would click that and then click share, and then all the participants can see it. But I would discourage the use of that. It's not really necessary unless you have something you really, really want to show the student. But the student will also have their project pulled up on their own computer. So if you reference something, they can likely also be looking at the same thing. For website judges, you're going to look at the websites ahead of time. So those do not need to be pulled up. The student should not be sharing their screen and walking you through their website. You're just interviewing them at this time. So next, what will happen is when you begin your interviews, to ensure that students aren't entering the waiting room at times that they shouldn't be, or entering the Zoom meeting, at times that they shouldn't be prior to their interview time, we will have a waiting room. And you will let the students in from the waiting room as their interview time, as it comes to be their interview time. You'll interview them, they'll leave the meeting, you can take notes, and then let the next student in. Okay, so as soon as you are inside the Zoom meeting and you have everything set up for your Zoom interviews, and a student is approaching their interview time, they'll join the Zoom meeting through the same link, and you'll see up here when a student joins, Zachary Gaypart entered the waiting room. So this means a student is ready to join the Zoom, and all you have to do is admit them when you're ready for their interview. Students will enter the waiting room a little bit early prior to their scheduled interview time, but you don't need to admit them until you're totally ready to do that. So you can also view this to see who is in the waiting room and who's in the meeting. You can click this right here to message the individuals in the waiting room. If you're ready to admit that person, you can then click admit. And this will take a few seconds, and then you'll see they're connecting to audio. So as soon as you can see the student and hear the student, then you are ready to conduct the interview. And you'll just repeat that process. As soon as you're completed with Zach's interview, he'll leave the Zoom call, and then you can admit the next student from the waiting room once you've gone over your notes and you're prepared to do that. So that's what's going to happen for you to enter the Zoom meeting. And as I said, you can stay in this Zoom meeting after the student interviews to discuss your comments and whatnot. If you ever have an issue during the day, the best way to reach me is to text me. And I will have a couple of interns who are also assisting me. And if I'm helping another group, they can jump on and help you. They will also have permissions to get into your meeting. So as I said, the best way to get a hold of me quickly is to text me. And I will provide you my phone number in the judging documentation. Okay, so now we're going to go over how to download the Zoom app so that you're prepared for the contest day. And here's how you're going to do that. So you can either go to the Zoom website, which is zoom.us, and then you would go over to resources and download Zoom client. And you would click on this first box here, Zoom client for meetings, and then download. Otherwise, if you want to join the Zoom link meeting a little bit earlier on the day of the contest, it will also prompt you to download the app then. So you can do either of those ways to download the Zoom meeting. You do not need to create an account. So that's up to you. Or if you already have an account, that's totally fine. But if you're new to Zoom, you do not need to create an account. So all you need to do is either download the Zoom app from here, or it will prompt you to do so when you open your first Zoom meeting. So that's going to conclude our judge training. I know this is a little bit lengthy and there's a lot of information to digest. So we're so happy that you're sticking with us and judging these virtual contests and making this happen for the kids. If you have any questions, you can always email me at kayla.gapehart@ucdenver.edu. Thanks so much.